In this tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how you can make a normal mapped game prop without having to bake from a high poly to a low poly model, but rather just by painting the normal map entirely in Photoshop. So the prop that I'm going to be working with is this chair. You can see that it's modeled very simply. It's all 90-degree corners and straight edges. This is intentional. I'm going to be adding some crookedness, a little bit of wonk to it later, but it's going to start out like this. You can see over here in the UV editor, I've laid out my UVs again, very simply, keeping my islands as straight and as square as possible so that I can pack them efficiently without wasting a lot of space on my texture sheet. Uh, Also, some parts of the chair have overlapping UVs, both to cut down on the amount of hand painting that I'm going to have to do, uh, as well as just to conserve texture space. So over here in my Photoshop document, I've already got my folders set up for the different map types that I'm going to be making. Roughness, normals, ambient occlusion, metalness, and of course the diffuse. I also have a folder with some tiling normal maps. I'm going to be using these to add some small scale details to my normal map later. I also have this layer with my UV layout pasted onto it. I'm going to be using Espresso Exporter to export my maps from Photoshop. This is a free extension by Francesco Camarlini, and you can download it off of Gumroad. I'll post a link in the description. But yeah, this is an amazing extension for batch exporting your game maps. I use it all the time. I wouldn't work without it. So I've got 3 exports set up, one for my diffuse map, one for my normal map, and one for my MRO map, which has the metalness packed into the red channel, the roughness packed into the green, and the AO is packed in the blue channel. Very common setup. So I'm going to start by turning off my ID maps and exporting just a gray texture for my diffuse. And loading that into Blender. Now, the first thing that I want to do is add some fake bevels to the corners of my chair. And it's going to be important that these are exactly 45-degree bevels, because if there's a UV split down the corner here, then we want a 45-degree normal on this side of the edge and a 45-degree normal on the other side so that they line up and look like one continuous facet down the middle of the corner. So in order to do that, I'm going to be using the Pixel B normal tools. This is a Photoshop extension that I wrote in order to make normal maps like this. That's going to be available on my Gumroad, and I'll post a link in the description for that as well. So I'm going to start by using the Make Shape tool. What this tool does is that it will take a selection in your document and make a beveled normal shape from that, like so. And it will respect the settings over to the right here. There are controls for the depth, for the direction of the bevel, up or down, and for the style of the bevel. A chisel hard is going to be very precise, very hard-edged, and smooth is going to give you some smoother transitions between the colors. So yeah, that's the difference between a chisel hard and a smooth, and chisel soft is somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to grab the negative space around my UV islands and then select and invert that selection. And then I'm going to do, I think a good depth would be 8. Direction should be up. Let's go chisel hard, and I'll make a shape. And I'll drop that shape into my normal map folder. I'm also going to bleed out the colors and fill in the transparent areas of my layer. And for that, I will use I have a filter that I got off the internet from a company called Flaming Pear. So I'm just going to use that to bleed out the transparent parts of my layer. Save my doc and I'll export my maps. And then over in Blender, I'll reload my normal map. And you can see that I've got a convincing 45-degree bevel on all of my 90-degree corners now. Again, the color that you're using here is going to be pretty important. These are exactly 45-degree bevels, and this is the same type of bevel that you would get if you had painted it, picking in colors from the outermost ring of these normal map swatches. Back in Blender, what I want to do is edit the geometry of my chair now to make it look less boring, more organic and wonky. But doing that is going to affect my normals. So right now our normal map is highly dependent on the vertex normals of our model. And if the vertex normals change, it's going to affect the way the shading looks on our model. And you can see that as I move this face around, the vertex normals are updating automatically. We would want that to not happen. Maya has an option called lock normals that will stop your normals from updating as you edit your mesh, but Blender doesn't have that. So to get around this, I made another tool, a Blender-based tool called Stash Vertex Normals. This is available for free on my GitHub page. And what this does is that it will store your vertex normals to a color attribute, and then it will allow you to edit the mesh and paste back those normals just as they were originally. So this is the add-on right here. I'll hit Stash Vertex Normals, and you can see it created the color attribute with the name Stash Normals, which is the default. It can be anything you want. You can change it so that you can stash and restore multiple sets of normals. I'll stick with the default name. I'll just store that once, and now if I make changes to my model, the normals will still update, but I'll be able to paste them back exactly as they were originally. So I'm going to take a few minutes now to do a pass on my chair, give it some sag, give it some droop, give it some taper, and some of that juicy character, and I will see you in a few minutes. Okay, I'm feeling pretty good about the shape of my chair now. I'm going to hit Retrieve Vertex Normals one more time to restore the original shading on my model. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of my normal map, and using the colors in the outer ring of the color picker, I'm just going to paint into those bevels and make those edges more uneven and more interesting to look at. It's all about making this chair look and feel rustic, like it was crafted by hand. I'm looking at these bevels now, and I feel like they're not really needed on the sides of these crossbars, so I'm going to paint them out there. Now I'm going to paint in some additional cracks and divots into the wood just by picking colors from my normal map swatch. And it takes some practice to develop an intuition for which colors to pick. But one way to think about it is that if you're painting in extruded form, then faces pointing upwards get green, and faces pointing downwards get purple, and right get pink, and green get teal. But if you're painting forms that are recessed, then basically the inverse is true. And now the faces that are pointing upwards get purple, and the faces that are pointing downwards get green, and everything is just uh, flipped around. So if it helps you, you can paint out an inverted version of the color swatch to pick from instead. But me, I'm just going to go ahead and start painting. I'll also paint some individual planks into the seat. I noticed that the planks on the seat of my chair are going in the wrong direction, so I'm just going to grab that part of my normal map. I will copy and paste it into a new layer, and then I'll use rotate counterclockwise to rotate that layer 90 degrees, and that will also correct the color of the normals. So I'll scale that layer back into place. I'll merge it down with the layer below. And now my grooves will be flowing in the right direction. I'll also take this opportunity to run a normalize on my layer. The effect of this is going to be pretty subtle, but what it's doing is basically correcting the colors of your normals so that the red, green, and blue channels are all adding up to one. And if I paint some colors that are clearly out of range, you'll get a better idea of what the effect is. So it will bring those colors back within the range of mathematically correct normal colors. Let's add a cool shape to the back of the seat of the chair. I'm going to lasso select a little something, maybe get a little spiral going. Let's finesse the shape. And then I'll give it a depth of 8. I want this to be going down. I'll go with maybe a chisel soft. And that looks pretty good. I'll lock transparency on the layer. And with my brush, I'll go in and give it a slightly flatter bottom and make it so that the sides of the bevel are not completely uniform in width. And I'll also paint out some of the banding and the colors. I'll go ahead and merge that with the layer below, and I'll also run normalize on it just to be safe. So now I'm going to bring in some of those detail normals that I made earlier. I'll copy them, I'll bring them into my normal folder, and to ensure that they blend correctly with the below layers, I'm going to use make overlay and then bring down the intensity. I also want these detail normals to not affect all of the bevels that I painted in. So I'm going to do a select by color range with the magic wand tool. I'll turn off contiguous selection and I'll select all of the flat areas. These are the only ones that I want my detail layers to affect. So I'll add a mask. And I think I want to invert the normals here so that the grain looks recessed. I'll use the same mask again for my scallop layer. Set the blending mode there as well. And bring down the intensity. Oh, and it looks like I need to change the direction of the grain on the seat. So I'll turn off the normal blending for a second using clear overlay. I'll cut and paste that part of the detail map into a new layer and rotate it clockwise. I'll transform it into place. Then I'll just move this mask for a second. I'll merge my grain layers together, bring back the mask, and set it to overlay again. Bring down the opacity. There, and now my grain is flowing in the right direction. There's one more thing I want to add. I think the chair would look good with some nails on the sides of the seat here. So I'm going to add those in the normal map. I'll do another lasso select. These are kind of rustic looking nails. And for these, we'll go chisel hard, make shape. I'll just lock transparency, grab my brush, and flatten off the tops of those nails. And then I want the wood around them to look a little bit recessed. So I'm going to select the nails and then invert the selection, and I'll make another shape. Go chisel soft. And then I'm going to have to paint out the borders of this layer. I'll use make overlay to set the blending on this layer. And now it looks like the nails are recessed into the wood. So with our normal map completed, we are ready to start thinking about the other maps our material is going to need: the color, the roughness, the metalness, and the ambient occlusion. For this, I'm going to introduce another tool, the Pixelbee Games Maps tool. And this tool is used for generating normal maps from height and also generating the ambient occlusion and cavity maps from the normal map. And we're going to be using the AO and the cavity maps extensively across our other textures. So we're going to start by generating those two. With my normal map folder selected, I'm going to make sure auto-propagate is turned off for now. And I'm going to generate a cavity and also a ambient occlusion map. And those two maps we can just put at the top of our document, and I'll copy them across the various folders. So naturally the AO map would go in the AO folder. And as I copy these, I'm going to be removing the copy from the ends of the names. This is important. You'll see why later. I'll also bring the ambient occlusion into the roughness folder and the cavity map as well. So let's take a closer look at that roughness. I want the ambient occlusion, and I want the recessed areas of my model to be less shiny in the roughness map. So I'm going to do an invert adjustment layer and make a clipping mask out of that so that it only affects the AO layer. And then I'll set my AO layer to screen and toy with the opacity a little bit. And I'll do something similar for the cavity map, setting that one to overlay and bringing down the intensity. I'll also duplicate the AO and cavity into my base color folder. And again, remove copy from the names. I'll set the AO map to multiply. Now, this isn't a physically correct PBR to have your AO baked into your albedo like this, so this isn't what I would call a true albedo, but this is a stylized prop, so we're not worried too much about keeping it PBR compliant. I'm going to use a hue saturation adjustment layer to tint the color of the AO, give it a nice rusty warm color. And then the cavity I'll set to overlay and bring down the opacity. It's nice to have the cavity there to pop the details. And I'll also create a solid fill layer with a warm beige color for the base of my wood. Reload my maps. Uh, and you can see I've got these dark corners here that are being created from the AO. Because of the way the AO is generated, it shows up on those beveled corners, but I really just want it to be affecting the spiral and the cracks and the planks on the seat of the chair. So I'm going to mask out the AO everywhere else. I will select the areas that I want the AO map to affect. I use a polygonal lasso to grab the back seat of the chair. And then I'll apply a mask. And then maybe blur the border of that mask just a little bit to hide any sharp transition. Then I'll grab the mask and I'll also use it on the AO layer in the AO folder. Export all layers, reload, and now my dark corners have vanished. Now let's take a look at what auto-propagate does. So with this auto-propagate option turned on, rather than creating a new cavity or a new ambient occlusion layer when I click these buttons, it's going to take the results of that operation and paste it into any existing cavity or ambient occlusion layers that are already in the document. And the names have to be exactly the same, which is why I removed copy from the layer names earlier when I duplicated them. But let's take a look at how that works. I'm going to change my ambient occlusion settings from weak to strong and regenerate my AO. And you can see that my ambient occlusion layers have been updated all across the document. And you can see it's preserved any layer masks that were applied to the layers. And in my roughness folder, it's preserved the changes that I made to the opacity and to the blending options. All of that is still in place. It's just the contents of the layers themselves that have been updated. And we can see how that works with the cavity as well. I'll switch it to strong and regenerate. And now the cavity is much stronger across all of the folders. So if you ever need to regenerate your cavity and AO, this just saves you the trouble of having to copy paste the results across all of your folders. I was happy with the original look of the cavity in AO though, so I'm setting them back to weak and regenerating both of them. Now let's take another look at those nails. I'm going to control click the nails layer in my normal map to get a selection that's the right shape. I'll make a new layer in my color folder, I call it nails, and I'll fill it with metallic gray color. Then I'm going to duplicate it, move it into my roughness, and then I'm going to remove copy from the layer name. And again, you'll see why in a minute. And I'll make a new adjustment layer, solid color, get rid of the mask, I don't need it, and change the adjustment layer to a clipping mask. I'm going to use this to control the color of my nails in the roughness. And then I'm going to do something similar in my metal folder. I'll duplicate the nails layer again, create another solid color adjustment layer, get rid of the mask, and then create a clipping mask. And those nails will be mostly white because they're the only metallic thing in this chair. Now, let's say that I had changed my mind about the number of nails and the placement. So let's say that I also wanted some nails in the backboard of the chair, of the seat. So here I'm just going to, again, lasso select some rough nail shapes. And then back in the normal tools, I'll make a normal shape and add that to my existing nails. And then I'll go ahead and do the embedded wood normal again by grabbing the nails, selecting the invert, make shape, paint out those borders again. Then I'll set it to overlay, get rid of the old embedded wood layer. And now I have to update the contents of the nails layer across all of my other maps. So I'm going to update it once in the base folder. And then with the layer selected, I'll hit propagate to layers. And that will copy the contents of the nails layer and paste it to all other layers in the document that are called nails. You can see it's updated across my roughness and my metalness folders. With the color adjustment layers still controlling the color. So now I can regenerate my cavity map and my ambient occlusion map from my normals. And now of my folders are completely updated and ready to be exported. And there you go. But now that I look at it, I think I don't really want those nails there after all, so I'm just going to remove them from the nails layer. And also from my normals folder. And then I'll update my cavity and AO again. And just like that, I'm back to where I was. Now I'm going to work on adding some color variation to the diffuse. I'm going to create a new layer in my color folder, and I'm just gently going to brush in some natural color variation into the wood. Bring down the flow of my brush. Well, this doesn't have to be super precise. It's just about adding some organic variation. I'm being cautious as I paint not to get too close to the bevels that I painted in, because I want those to stay a uniform color so I don't have to worry about accidentally introducing any seams across the borders of my UV islands. Let's take a look. Yeah, I think that's pretty okay. Finally, I think I'm going to do an additional layer to add some grime to the chair, and I'll keep it separate from the color variation that I just added so I can also use it to inform my roughness map. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'll call it grime, uh, GRIME. And for this one, I think I'll control the opacity with a mask. So I'm just going to fill this one with a greenish tint, a light green, and then I'll mix in some other tones. You know, grime is seldom one uniform color. And then I'll add a mask. I'll fill my mask with black so the grime is entirely hidden. And then Using my square brush, I will just gradually paint some of it back into the recessed areas of my chair, the sides of the seat, and anywhere where two pieces are joined. Maybe this will look better as an overlay layer than a multiply. I'll darken the colors to compensate for the different blend mode. And then again, make sure that that grime is not hitting any of my UV borders, so I don't accidentally introduce any seams. I'm ready to copy the contents over to my roughness folder. So I'm just going to make a new layer. I'll call this one grime as well. And then I'll select the original grime layer. And in game maps, I'll make sure that propagate maps is ticked on, so it propagates the mask as well. And now when I hit propagate layers, it will copy the contents of the grime to that new layer in the roughness folder. And from there, I can add another solid color layer. And I'll use that to drive the color of the grime while using my existing mask to control its placement. And here's our finished chair. So that's how you make a fully textured game prop end-to-end entirely in Photoshop. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you like this video, why don't you go for a walk? The exercise would be good for you.